Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your practice. Thank you for sharing this moment with me. This is a moment we will never experience again. So as we accumulate these moments, let us build our confidence in our Buddha-ness. Yes? Experiencing every potential of our lives in each moment of our lives. Yeah? Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Thank you for being on this journey with me and with yourselves and others. Life is an amazing, amazing thing. And the weather today reminds me of that as the clouds clear and the sun breaks through. So appreciative for this wonderful life. All right. On that note, Mahamati and Shakyamuni are embroiled in a in a teaching and learning back and forth. Mahamati is struggling mightily with how should I say it? You know, there are many groups, sects, whatever, that study Buddhism, and yet, just like any field of study, there are those who are just creating new habits, and what I've said in the past is kind of derisive, but it's true. They're just playing at Buddhism so that they can be part of a group or distinguish themselves as they know something somebody else doesn't. And unfortunately, with that kind of commitment, Buddhism just becomes like anything else, just another samsaric game. There's not a lot of gain happening there. Undoubtedly, if they're practicing any form of Lotus Sutra Buddhism, just by the very nature of the invocation of Buddha-ness, they will grow, but the rate at which they will grow, because they continue to hold on to egotistical, whether they see that or not, validation of their samsaric possessions. Yes? And even at the highest levels of Buddhism, practice of Buddhism, our doggedness of samsara, of identification, leads people astray. And even with the amazing teachings of Shakyamuni on Buddha-ness and how to attain this clarity of mind, there continues to be, to this day, many who, for reasons of their own, cling to identity and, not just unfortunately, heinously, promote Buddhism as a way to aggrandize themselves, and which is antithetical to Buddhism. Certainly not Bodhi. It's not Bodhisattva. And so this dividing line within the eras and years of teachings ends up falling somewhere on the line between the early teachings and the later teachings. But even in Mahayana, as we're witnessing in the Lankavatara, this struggle continues with those avid students of Buddhism who just can't seem to wrap their heads around the idea that there's a mind beyond their attachments. They can talk about it, they can vocalize it, they can learn it, they can spit it back at you, what's the saying? Word and verse or chapter and verse, right? But they don't get it. And so Mahamati and Shakyamuni have been circumlocuting this problem for a while now in the Lankavatara. And I think we're going to hit it much more straight on this time. So with that in mind, let's dive in, shall we? At that time, Mahamati made this request of the emancipated one. Please tell me, about the being and non-being of all things. And when myself and other Bodhisattva Mahasattvas are freed from the notions of being and non-being, may we quickly attain supreme enlightenment. So again, this is the same question repeated, but it's repeated in a slightly different way. It's basically saying, okay, you've talked about this intermediacy, right? Moment to moment. As we practice Lotus Sutra, we understand life is moment to moment, and this has been repeated constantly, yes? And in those moments, there is manifestation of energy, manifestation of potential. And those manifestations, because they are manifested moment to moment, they never rest. They never just instantiate and they exist for all time. No. It's a process. They're instantiating. They're manifesting. It's a continued manifestation. You may build a bookcase. You may build an automobile. You may build a spaceship or a house. But even as you're building, and any carpenter knows this, as you're building a house, the timbers are changing. They're not just there. They're not permanent. There's a structure. It holds together for a time, and the nature of its holding together is constantly changing. You ever hear creaking floorboards? Little noises in the house that make you go, what was that? But then we discount it, we throw it away. We need to understand the house is changing. It's dissolving. Just that the time scale throws us. Yeah? So the idea in Buddhism is if you realize that moment to moment, then you gain a completely different appreciation for what it is you're living in. The idea of possessing starts to disassemble, doesn't it? Because what you possess is just a momentary instantiation of something, and in the next few moments, what you thought you possessed, it's not even there anymore because now it's different. And so the idea isn't to think that everything is nothing. The idea is to disconnect from the identification, the ownership, and instead be within the being of these things. Appreciate that the house still holds in every moment. I'm protected. I have a shelter. And with that kind of mentality, then there's maybe a more nurturing side of thinking that comes out and says, I'm living with this house, and this house has needs. And I want to give to this house, appease its needs, so it continues to provide for me the function house. Instead of, I'll wait till that falls apart and then I'll fix it. That's a very lazy kind of, if we treated each other that way, we would get upset. Why do you only pay attention to me when it serves you? I need more attention. I need to feel a part of your life, right? Isn't that what we do in relationships? Well, we need to be more like that with everything. More engaged, not entangled, but engaged. Because engagement is moment to moment. Entangled is baggage. I have this expectation because this is what I need. Yes? I'm not talking about selfishness, although certainly a component, yeah? Because selfishness is identification. So we're going to dive into this now. So, Shakyamuni responds, then Mahamati, listen well and reflect well within yourself. I will tell you. And that's important too that he says this, is don't just think this stuff as a student. Understand how your mind is at work here, how your life is at work here as I explain this to you. So Shakyamuni is not one to miss a beat when it comes to that, right? People of this world are dependent on two things, Mahamati. That is, they are dependent on the idea of being and on that of non-being. Okay? What that really should say is being, in other words, in possession of, and non-being being non-attached. This is the nature of the question. Or perhaps more appropriately, non-entangled. Right? We can appreciate seaweed in the water, but when we swim up through the water and end up in the midst of the seaweed, we panic a little bit. We're entangled. And they fall into the views whereby they take pleasure either in nihilism or realism. There it is. This is the early teaching versus latter teaching problem, often called Hinayana and Mahayana. But I'm identifying for you that it's not just simply those earliest teachings grouped together as Hinayana. I'm saying it travels well into the Mahayana, because those concepts are constantly returned to as just a simple version, a misunderstanding, a shallow understanding of the teachings of Shakyamuni. And why does this happen, nihilism or realism? Because the idea of being and non-being is misunderstood. This is why I changed those words to entangled or non-entangled. Because being, to a shallow understanding of Buddhism, is all the stuff. Do you see? It's all the identification. Well, if I am, then all of this am, then I amness is all of this with me. I can't exist without this body and that chair and those trees. That's the whole miasm of identification. But if instead, and it's hard to do this with words, but instead of I exist, therefore everything exists, or everything exists, therefore I exist, like Descartes saying, I think, therefore I am, that's on the cusp of understanding The mind is makes the instantiation of a self. But rather than I think, therefore I am, it should be I think, therefore is. Do you see the difference? If in your mind you can conceive of life being, instantiating a Sylvain, a Judy, a Frank, a tree, a chair, all the time, moment to moment to moment, then you are being amongst the entirety of the universe, processing through time-space. But if your idea of being is I, ego built of surrounding stuff, then you're missing it. That's samsara. This is a critical difference. And these translations do a very poor job of capturing that subtlety. Subtle, yet profound. Yeah? So being is an understanding, a perception, an experience of all of life coursing through your mind. That is Buddha-ness. But if being is identified as this corporal reality, then you're slipping into ego, identification, possessing. So the reason that from this dividing line of being life as opposed to existing as a thing within life leads to nihilism or realism is this idea that in order to be enlightened and with all of life necessitates the destruction of all things. And that may resonate with some of these translations, even the words of Shakyamuni. But when the destruction happens, remember the word he used here is revulsion. It's not a destruction. It's not a getting rid of. It's a letting go of our involvement, our entanglements of identity in place of our realization of the energies entirety as it instantiates our individual local mind of Buddha-ness. And realism is just a flip side of nihilism because it's attached. Our conception of realism is that that is and that is not, which is a conundrum because how can you point to that if it is not? Anyway, language, right? So yeah, please get this fundamental point. Right, Chloe? Yeah, poor dog. Okay. They imagine emancipation where there is no emancipation. In other words, those who cling to physical reality as a permanent thing and therefore think that they need to annihilate nihilism. Enlightenment can only happen when everything is gone. They think that that's emancipation, liberty, when in fact that is not emancipation. In order to be, think about this with words now. In order to be free of, to be emancipated of, isn't there an explicit subject? To be emancipated of nothing, how is that emancipation? If you're emancipated from entanglements, from the things, now you're emancipated. Now there's a subject to which you are liberated. Makes sense, right? But nihilism says everything must be completely destroyed in mind and in reality in order for us to attain this. Well, that's just a religion. It's the only way that happens is in death, like there's an existence there. Life is existence. Death is the end of that. Right? Birth, death, birth, death, birth, death. Two sides of the same coin. The process is what the coin is emergent from. The process, life, spawns manifestations that are moment to moment, birth, death, birth, death, birth, death, birth, death. Death isn't the opposite of life. Death is the opposite of birth because it's the other side of that moment. And we can, while we're birth, death, manifesting, because of our emergent mind, our sentience, we can witness outside of our little samsaric birth, death trap, the entirety of the process that spawns birth, death, birth, death. Buddha-ness. Now, Mahamati, who are the people dependent on the notion of being? It means this, that they regard the world as rising from causation, which is really existent, and that the actually existing and becoming world does not take its rise from causation, which is non-existent. This will not be the case if the world is something non-existing. They thus talk of the really existing world as arising from the reality of causation. Thus, this is the realistic view of causation as held by some people. Now, Mahamati, what is meant by being dependent upon the idea of non-being? It means, Mahamati, admitting greed, anger, and folly, and yet discriminating as regards the non-reality of what makes up greed, anger, and folly. And Mahamati, there is one who does not admit the reality of things because of their being devoid of individual marks, and there is another who, seeing the Buddhas, Shravakas, and Pratyeka Buddhas are free from greed, anger, and folly because of all things being devoid of individual marks, do not exist. But that existence question is in the mind. Never forget this. Buddhism is about the mind's function, not atoms and molecules. It's about perception and experience. Now, Mahamati, who of these is the one doomed to ruin? Mahamati says, it is he who, admitting greed, anger, and folly, yet refuses to admit them. And Shakyamuni says, well said indeed, Mahamati. Again, thou hast indeed spoken well, Mahamati. So intellectually you get this. Not only is he himself doomed to ruin because of his notion of greed, anger, and folly as existent and yet as non-existent, but he ruins even the character of the Buddha, the Shravakas, and the Pratyeka Buddhas. Why? Because the passions are not to be taken hold of innerly and outwardly, because they are neither different nor non-different. He's talking about entanglements. Mahamati, greed, anger, and folly too are not to be taken hold of innerly as well as outwardly. They have no substance of their own, and they are not to be admitted. Mahamati, there is no reality in the nature of greed, anger, and folly. He who fails to understand this is one who ruins the character of Buddha, Sravaka, and Pratyeka Buddha. The Buddha, Sravaka, and Pratyeka Buddha are by nature emancipated, as there is in them no cause for being bound and binding. Mahamati, where there is a state of being bound, there are the binding and the cause of bondage. One who talks thus, such is doomed to ruin. Mahamati, this characterizes nihilism and realism. This is stated by me in accordance with the deeper sense, the Buddha wisdom. It is better to cherish the notion of an ego substance as much as Mount Sumeru than to have the notion of emptiness derived from self-conceited view of being and non-being. What does he mean by that? He would rather you understood yourself as this huge compiled identification I, than to hold the notion in your mind derived from emptiness, an improper understanding of emptiness, that suggests that everything must be annihilated or is real, that duality. Because that's an egotistical construction. And he's identifying that egotistical construction as a self-ruin rather than a mastery. And he's dividing that ego question for Mahamati. One who is conceited in the view of being and non-being is indeed doomed to ruin. Conceited, right? Upholding identification. Those who are delighted in cherishing notions of individuality and generality fail to understand that an external world is nothing but mind itself and has no reality. They're just stuck. And as they do not understand this, they regard things external as transient, for they suffer every moment changes which follow one another, now splitting, now dividing, while the skandhas, dhatus, and ayatanas succeeding one another and combining with one another now come forward and now pass away. So from the standpoint of a student in the early stages of understanding how the mind works and their Buddhist practice, will conceive of things moment to moment, coming into being, abiding, and dissolving, moment to moment to moment to moment. At least that, Shakyamuni is saying, is better than the one who sees himself as distinct, as separated from everything by virtue of their physical destruction. They're missing the mental point. They're stuck in realism and therefore nihilism. But a new reality emerges with Shakyamuni's teachings of everything, including the self, in process. That is reality, but that's a reality that can't be grasped, can't be held, can't be owned. It's only experience of each birth, that's everything. That's a big mental shift, yeah? They who thus, discarding words of the teachings, are given up to wrong discriminations are also doomed to ruin, because they stand their ego apart from, they don't understand that they're the same thing, that they somehow, talk about ego, masters of all of this. As far as the duality of being and non-being extends, there is the realm of intellection. When this realm vanishes, intellection completely ceases. So again, he's talking about the mind as identity. Get off this identification train. But the ego, man, the ego doesn't want to let go, does it? No, I definitely am. It's everything else that must go. Right? When the external world is not grasped, if you're not entangled, not that it goes away, not nihilism, right? But our entanglements, that's the grasping wordage. When the external world is not grasped as permanent, there is neither causation nor reality. There is the essence of suchness, tathata, suchness. Suchness, the constant remanifestation of energies. It's a suchness. It's a component of potential that is instantiating, moment to moment to moment to moment. That's a suchness. The chair suchness, the Bruce suchness, the microphone suchness. It's an ongoing, active, moving through time-space target of manifestations of groups of energy, potential energies. It's a suchness. Which is the mental realm of the wise. Those who believe in the birth of something that has never been in existence and coming to exist finally vanishes away, which leads them to assert that things come to exist, things pass away according to causation. Such people have no foothold in my teaching. This is just the process of potentials at work. This isn't a pre-planned. This is why there's no room in Buddhist thought for a creator, an omniscient consciousness. There's nobody who's planning chair to exist in the year 3 billion, 4,000, right? These are just the events of energy instantiating. It's just the process that we are a part of and in. It is not by the philosophers, not by the Buddhas, not by myself, not by anybody else, but by causation that beings obtains. How can one talk of non-being? It is not by the philosophers, not by the Buddhas, not by myself, not by anybody else, but by causation that being obtains. How can one talk of non-being? In other words, the process produces various manifestations of potential. And it's moment to moment. So how can we talk about there being not what exactly? Because it's a process. It's not a thing. There's evidence of processes, myriad processes, moving through time-space. How is there not that? That's a man-made, that's an intellectualization that doesn't hold in Buddhism. When being obtains by causation, who can bring about non-being? By reason of the wrong views based on the doctrine of birth, being and non-being are discriminated. So he's talking, Suzuki's using the word birth here. And if Shakyamuni used something similar to that, he's talking about the idea that something is created of itself. And there's still a hanging on, a qualifier, a permanentizing, a thingifying of a process. The idea of a birth of something is to say that there is precipitated from the energies of the universe a permanent thing. And this is the primary step of delusion. Because in reality, it's just a manifestation of vast potentials that just arises, abides, and dissolves. It's not permanent. It's not born, as it were. It's just manifesting. It is being. It's subtle, but it's profound. And if you're stuck on that permanentizing, then that's why you're stuck into the idea of there is and there isn't. When it is realized that there is nothing born, nothing passing away, there is no way to admit its being and not being, the world is to be regarded as quiescent. There it is. Right back to quiescent energy. Just like a pool of water freezes at certain temperatures, liquefies at certain temperatures, vaporizes at certain temperatures, ultimately it's just water. To be attached to ice cubes as that cube is born is to buy into the illusion of thingifying and identification. It's just water in a different form. Make sense? Where are we time-wise? Why is that coming up? Goodness knows. Okay. At that time, again, Mahamadi, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, requested of the emancipated one, please point out to me. Please point it out to me. Sugata. Point it out to me, Tathagata. Arhat, fully enlightened. Arhat doesn't belong in here. I don't know why he keeps pushing it. Tell me, most excellent one, what is the characteristic of the realization by which I and other Bodhisattva Mahasattvas, becoming thoroughly conversant with the meaning, may quickly attain the highest enlightenment and, relying upon themselves, will not be led away by any speculations or philosophies? Give me the magic formula. Please. Please tell me, Buddha. This Buddha-ness, it can't be something I realize on my own. There's got to be some trick. Please tell me the trick. You want to backslap this guy. But, his questions are legitimate from a mind that simply won't let go of things, its possessions. How can I possibly find in my mind that latch, that linchpin that I can pull so that I get it, so that I can live in this unentangled reality, fully experiencing my life through Buddha-ness without relying on identification, owning, losing, so on and so forth? What's that magic thing? Of course, you and I know from Lotus Sutra that ultimately the linchpin is Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. It is our tool to immediately penetrate our Buddha-ness, yes? But at this point of Mahayana, Shakyamuni is simply trying to describe the process, the release, the goal. And people are not getting it. So he says, well, listen to Mahamati and well reflect within yourself, I will tell you. Mahamati the Bodhisattva says, certainly I will, and he gave her ear to the Enlightened One. Thereupon, Shakyamuni says, there are two ways of characterizing the realization attained by the Shravakas and Pratyekabuddhas and the Bodhisattvas, the realization itself and the teaching about it. Okay? It's obvious. He's coming at this same question from yet another angle, trying to make his point. Yeah? Now, Mahamati, by the realization itself, is meant that it is the realm of the inner attainment. Its characteristic features are that it has nothing to do with words, discriminations, and letters, that it leads one up to the realm of non-outflows, non-entanglements, that it is the state of an inner experience, that it is entirely devoid of philosophical speculations and the doings of evil beings or distractors, right? And that destroying philosophical speculations and the doings of evil beings, it shines out in its own inner light of attainment. These Mahamati are the characteristics of the realizations. This is your aha moment. How do you describe your epiphany? There are no words for it. There are no attendant things. There are not even discriminations of identity, right? An aha moment, an insight, is a pure, clear revisiting of experience in that moment. I'm throwing a lot of words around it, but they describe the environment of it, but they don't describe that sensation. We've all had those moments where suddenly everything becomes clear. Well, what is everything becomes clear? So you see, the words fail. They just point to an experience, because enlightenment is an experience. It's not a thing. It's not a behavior. Now, Mahamati, what is meant by the teaching concerning it? What we're doing right now. It is variously given in the 9 divisions of the doctrinal works. It keeps one away from the dualistic notions of being and non-being, of oneness and otherness, of bothness and non-bothness, right? Over and over again. Intellectually, first making use of the skillful means and expedients, right? We tell stories about this to kind of hone in on the way the mind does this. It induces all beings to have a perception of the teaching. And here is where that tug is, because if your perception is the teaching, then you're just identifying all over again. So that whoever is inclined towards it may be instructed in it. This, Mahamati, is the characteristic of the teaching. Let therefore, Mahamati, you and the other Bodhisattva Mahasattvas, exert yourselves in this. Reach the profundity of the teachings and understanding intellectually, so that you can then, by fully understanding it, understand what it then means to let that go. And this is the whole program of the way Shakyamuni taught Buddhism, and largely how we teach one another anything. We dissect things to their ultimate components so that we can understand either how to then construct or deconstruct anything. Isn't that chemistry, biology, physics? Realization and teaching, self-attainment and doctrinal instruction. Those who have an insight into the difference will not be led away by philosophical authorities. realization and teaching, self-attainment, Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, and doctrinal instruction, the sutras, the teachings, all knowledge. Those who have insight into the difference will not be led astray by philosophical authorities. There is no truth in any object that is imagined by the ignorant. Ignorant being people who don't understand this difference, who don't understand the process of life. They are thingifying away, identifying everything, themselves, most of all, yeah. Deliverance is where there is no objective world, not by nihilistic means, but by attachment, entanglement. And that's not made clear in this translation, but it should be. Why is this not sought by the speculators? Why doesn't anybody think to look there? Well, number one, because this is a shitty translation. The world of the Samskritas is observed as the continuation of birth and death, whereby dualisms are nourished, and because of this perversion, the truth is not perceived. Because there's this entanglement with everything is a thing, a permanent thing, and our relations is everything about life. Our relationship to the real, to the position, birth, death of things, along with me, I, the ego, is the locus of existence. And that's a shallow understanding of life. That's not a penetrating understanding that all of it is just another layer of illusion on top of this process, this grand, difficult to conceive of process. It's simple to conceive of once you reach it, just like anything else. But this is the obstacle, our entanglements. There is just one truth, Shakyamuni says, which is nirvana, this mental cognition of the process, which emancipates one from the entanglements. Not from things, but the entanglements with things. It has nothing to do with the manas, the intellections, the vijnanas, all of that. The world seen as subject to discrimination resembles a plantain tree, a dream, a vision. Really the construct of the skandhas, right? The desire to experience, which is what spawns our apparatus to emerge a sentient mind, yeah? No greed there is, no anger, nor folly either. And again, no personal ego. From desire start the skandhas, which resemble a dream. Ba-dum-bump. The very mechanism, and this is important to realize, the very mechanisms, right? We have 9 consciousnesses, not in the Lanka, but 9 consciousnesses in Buddhism, yeah? And the first 6 or even 7 are about functions of instantiation, of manifestation, and more importantly, our apparatus to sense those things. And in order to sense those things, we must make a thing. It's the building blocks of what it is to be a human being. So don't beat yourself up. We're born of desire, many desires, the entire potential of desires. This whole engine of life is built on wanting to experience, wanting to check it out. What can all this energy do? How many ways can it manifest? Well, in order to know that or experience that, we need to understand, maybe it has colors. Well, what is colors? Well, what would we define colors as? Well, everything is light, energy, right? No mass, just energy, light, photons. Well, let's create something that captures photons. And if we capture something that captures photons, we need to limit it because some photons are so powerful we wouldn't be able to experience anything. We need to make it a narrow spectrum so we can get clues as to thingness. And then we'll need something to process that information and make images, make touchable, we need feeling, don't we? We need some apparatus, nerves. We'll make nerves. Oh, maybe the eye, maybe that vision thing could use nerves. And they could all communicate to this one central computer. And then we could touch things. Oh, we could smell things. Things could have an odor, and they could taste. We need a mouth, a tongue. We need to talk about all of these senses. Our consciousnesses developed from, go back to the Nidana, developed from a very rudimentary desire to experience. But along the way, experience becomes being, making things that we therefore hang on to as the things we wished to create. So the puzzle of identification, ego, all of that, it's built in at a very profound level of what creates this apparatus. It's only because at some point of development, this apparatus, which is so efficient at seeing, tasting, feeling, so on and so forth, can emerge something that isn't there. A sentient mind. A mind that isn't simply the program, the computer running data, but an observer, a witness. And unfortunately, or fortunately, the tendency for that mind is to go along validating what the computer is doing. Like a child sticking everything in its mouth. Isn't this wonderful? Isn't that wonderful? Never questioning the origins of all that stuff. And so the anxiety begins. Well, if I can have that, I want it. I want to maintain it. Where'd it go? Anxiety, loss, gain, hold. It's what we're built of. So don't feel badly. And don't think that in order to get clarity, you must simply destroy all of that. That's nihilism. That's kind of a knee-jerk reaction. Wait a minute. By more deeply understanding the process that we're all instantiating in, relax. The true nature of all phenomena, of all this experience, is just this quiescent energy sparking, making sparks. Enjoy the sparks. Don't be entangled with keeping them alive. There's no spark in that. That's a misunderstanding of the process. Does that make sense? Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. There's that clarity. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing these moments with me. Keep your practice strong. You're doing great. As evidenced by your practice, your being here, our communications. Those of you who are able to support this channel financially through Patreon or PayPal, Nam Myo Renge Kyo. I'm so grateful. All of us are. In the meantime, please take care of your health. Be kind to yourself. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one, okay? Bye-bye for now.